Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mission Minded, a podcast and holy conversation on mission endeavors in the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer and beyond. I'm Melanie Slane, your host for this episode, and today we welcome Alan Yarborough. Alan is the Church Relations Officer with the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations, which is a branch of the presiding bishop's staff out of New York, New York. City so nice they named it twice. So welcome, Alan. We're really glad to have you today. Alan and I served as missionaries together in the Young Adult Service Corps. If you don't know about this program, please ask me or go and search on the National Church website for Young Adult Service Corps. It's an amazing opportunity for young people ages 21 to 30 to serve the church abroad. And Alan and I met there, and I'm so excited to welcome him to Mission Minded as we talk this month, in the month of December, about refugee resettlement and what it looks like to be homeless in a foreign land. So Alan, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry in the church? What is the Office of Government Relations do?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. It's good to be with you and good to be with you all to talk about this. There are so many angles to our government relations work as a church, and also the church's work with immigration that has ties there, but a lot of other opportunities for engagement beyond the advocacy as well. But in terms of myself and the office I work for at the moment, I grew up in North Carolina as an Episcopalian, and then moved to Haiti in the Young Adult Service Corps, as you mentioned, and was there for a few years before coming to the Office of Government Relations. In this office, it's created in the late 1970s by General Convention to represent the policy positions of the Episcopal Church to the U.S. federal government. And so that is our primary role. We take our guidance from General Convention and Executive Council. So getting into some church nerdy talk. General Convention meets every 3 years, passes resolutions on a lot of things, including church governance, but also essentially public policy statements or guidance on what the church should be doing on different issues that can be addressed through public policy. Executive Council, which acts as our board, can do the same thing, and that's the only place that we get our guidance. And so we do that work, raising the voices of Episcopalians and Anglicans really around the world in the space of U.S. legislation and policy making, which is really cool.
So we pass the resolutions as a church body, and then you guys make sure that the government is trying to uphold the resolutions that we pass from our perspective. So you guys are like our lobbyists almost in DC.
Yep, absolutely. We are not formally registered lobbyists, but it is very similar work. So to sort of conceptually, we're there to bring the church's values into the public square and to encourage and equip Episcopalians in doing that work themselves. And that's sort of my particular role in the office as the church relations officer, is to guide Episcopalians in that work. Our main mechanism for doing that is the Episcopal Public Policy Network, on the little blue logo behind me, which is our grassroots network of Episcopalians engaged in this work. And there are a number of levels of engagement that people can join in with to speak out together collectively with other Episcopalians across the country on issues that matter to them, on issues that impact us directly, that impact our neighbors, immigration and refugee resettlement, being a significant part of that.
That is so awesome, Ellen. And I know for myself personally, you can sign up for advocacy alerts from the Episcopal Public Policy Network and make sure to stay plugged in on what's going on in the government and how it affects the church, and also how the church can help influence government. So it's a pretty awesome way to connect, and we're grateful for that in the church. This month, since it is December, I'd really, love to talk a little bit about those who find themselves homeless in a foreign land. I hope that that's something that is on people's minds right now. And of course, also there is ever present the reality of the refugee and immigrant crisis on the southern border. And I know you represent us in DC quite a bit, but right now you're living in South America, right? I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about what that looks like from your personal perspective and on the relationship between the church in the US and the church in South America.
Yeah, so, so I guess from a practical perspective, I'm living in Guatemala because my husband is in the U.S. Foreign Service. And so I followed his job there. So I'm able to do my work remotely for now and supporting the Office of Government Relations. That's a practical answer. But to get it sort of, I think, what you're, something deeper and how this informed my work. I mean, it is in some ways very similar still to my experience in Haiti. I worked in community and economic development there for the Episcopal Church and the Episcopal Diocese of Haiti. Haiti is our largest diocese as a part of the US-based Episcopal Church, and found
the largest diocese of all the dioceses.
Of all right? The dioceses in the Episcopal Church in the US, yes. And so, in that work, we constantly came across barriers or obstacles in the practical on-the-ground work that were in place because of U.S. foreign policy. And that ultimately motivated me to seek a job. I wasn't looking for the Episcopal Church necessarily, but to seek a job in D.C. to get experience in the policy making, in particular foreign policy in DC, and how that can influence positively or negatively other countries. And so there, are a number of ways that intersects with advocacy. There's the immigration pieces in terms of our immigration policy for people who are actually here or trying to get to the US, from refugee resettlement to asylum seekers, to people who are already here who are undocumented, to the southern situation at the southern US border. But there are also, elements of sort of a popular phrase now, but it's not necessarily a new one, of the root causes of migration. How are we addressing the reasons or the motivations behind people leaving their home? Most people who migrate do not do so by choice. They don't do so willingly because they're wanting to necessarily move elsewhere. They're forced out, whether that's for economic reasons, for violence, for environmental reasons at times. And so addressing some of those root causes, whether that's here in Guatemala or in Haiti, is also a critical part of our government advocacy work, and a critical part of addressing immigration as well. And so I think just being here in Guatemala is a reminder of that, being more immersed in current events here than I maybe otherwise would be, just not, having the were I not living here, I would maybe not necessarily be as invested, but it's a reminder of some of those things, of those root causes and how important it is to address them from a humanitarian standpoint, from our responsibility, I think, as US citizens who have the right to petition our government and choose who we vote for in our elections. Those, we actually have an outsized influence over what happens in other countries because of the influence of US foreign policy. Limited as it is, it's still quite powerful. And so we can help shape that through our own work and using our own voice.
That's beautiful. And it's a great reminder, I think, to us also as Christians and as Episcopalians that, you can keep pulling people out of the river and doing that, but you've got to go upstream and find out, how they're getting in there in the first place, and where is our role in healing and reconciling those situations and institutions that put people in a position where they would need to emigrate somewhere safer or with more opportunities for their livelihood. When people do emigrate to the United States from foreign lands, what kind of support do they have, governmental or from the church, in establishing a home, finding where they're going to live and what community looks like for them. Do you have an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, one of the key factors in that really is how an individual gets to the U.S. Or how they got to the U.S. Maybe they're an immigrant already here, and they don't have documented, or they're undocumented. They don't have a legal status. That reality, that pathway really shapes what's available to them, whether it's from the government or the opportunities they have for getting a work permit, that sort of thing. Really depends on their pathway for coming in. And overall, our work and from an advocacy perspective is looking at comprehensive immigration reform, of looking at really substantial repairs that have been needed for decades to our U.S. immigration policy to help facilitate that process and help support new immigrants so that they can really be fully thriving and participating people in our country, while also acknowledging, the needs to address human trafficking, our own national security. There are some very practical elements that are factors there as well, and the safety of the migrants in process. That's also an element, on their way, on their journey here or to their other destinations where they may be going. So that's
especially
not a very
with
specific,
unaccompanied minors, right?
Especially with unaccompanied minors too, absolutely. And we think, so I'll say one specific thing to that, it is challenging and heartbreaking to see and be aware of, detention facilities and child detention and that sort of thing. But ultimately, there's a very practical reality of how, for unaccompanied minors arriving at the border, what do we do? What does the U.S. government do? And it's just simply not feasible, I don't think, for anyone, regardless of how the resources are allocated. So as soon as somebody arrives at the border, a kid arrives at the border, find them somewhere to live. Like detention facilities, and so they have to be a part of this process. They need to be humane. There needs to be a compassionate process in place. Family separation is not something that is appropriate, and we have been very clear on speaking out against, from through our advocacy and work with the Episcopal Church. But ultimately, there's some very, very difficult realities to the process of immigration and how the U.S. government can help facilitate that process. And I think that's often lost on both sides, so to speak, of the immigration conversation.
For sure. A lot of gray space there.
There's a lot of gray space there. And so that's not a very comprehensive answer to, what resources are available to support people, but that's a start. And I think if we learn more, educate ourselves about these pathways to citizenship, pathways to documented status, from refugee resettlement, which is a very specific legal term, to asylum seekers, to the reality of people who are, DACA recipients. Like, what does that mean? It's really important to be precise when we're talking about these populations and when we're supporting them, because those legal distinctions make a difference in what's available to them. So I can talk more.
Does the Office of Government Relations have some educational opportunities or ways for people to really more deeply understand what these different specific legal terms mean and how the Episcopal Church is present with people in many different forms of that process?
We do, and a lot of the resources that we have, they're educational, are developed in collaboration with the Episcopal Migration Ministries. They're maybe most well known as the Refugee Resettlement Organization of the Episcopal Church, which is true. That's what they are. They're one of 9 agencies that the federal government contracts with to resettle refugees here in the U.S. But they really do a lot more than that. They do a lot of other organizing of direct ministry to immigrants here in the U.S., supporting a lot of dioceses, not just on the U.S. southern border, but elsewhere that have particular dynamics, in supporting immigrant communities. So we have explainers on those legal definitions. We have explainers on what our Episcopal Church policies are on immigration. It's maybe one of the more robust topic areas in terms of our church policy on it, which I find very admirable and thoughtful. And then Episcopal Migration Ministries, I'm maybe getting ahead of the conversation here, but they have a lot of opportunities to learn how to engage directly, whether that's through EMM directly, specifically, or referencing, sending people to other organizations that they partner with. So there are a lot of opportunities to be involved.
Yeah, it's a great reminder to for us as a church to educate, so that we really know when we move into ministerial and mission minded places in this conversation, that we educate ourselves on, what people's status is, how that works, what that means in terms of their arrival in the United States, and how we effectively minister to them. I remember specifically when I was I think I was in middle school. I was a young kid in the Episcopal Church in St. Louis, and we had a large influx of Somali Bantu refugees coming into the area, and the church was really active in gathering household furnishings and clothing items and food. And I remember a group of women at my church went to go cook with some of the women who had come and be with their children and share books and things like that, and teach English. That was a huge piece of their ministry. Does EMM provide opportunities like that for people to engage with people who are refugees here?
Absolutely. That's like the core, in some ways, the core of their work, especially with refugee resettlement. So, there are certainly options for financial contributions to support this and to support the resettlement process. But essentially, once someone who has refugee status and goes through the security screening, which can take years, lots of international agencies and the U.S. government involved in that. Once they're selected to be resettled here in the U.S., they're essentially, to shorten it, they're assigned to one of those refugee resettlement agencies, who are all coordinating with each other. And they will, each of those agencies has what are called placement sites. And that's sort of where volunteers with Episcopal Migration Ministries intersect, where they can come into play. And it's doing the things you just described. It's providing a lot of things that we may not, think about that could be helpful. It is finding housing, it's language training, it's navigating how to get a job. How do we get our kids into school? What does that look like? What are our options? There are a lot of transportation. There are a lot of really just very basic human points of connection that people can have. And I think, it's certainly being in a new culture. I mean, as someone who's voluntarily, gone abroad to live in a different place, it's intimidating, it's confusing, to do so with the trauma and the history that many immigrants and refugees come in with, is a whole other dynamic. But there's something despite those challenges, and I think what may cause some anxiety maybe among folks that want to volunteer and engage in this work, you're really just connecting to people on a human level. They may be in great need, but they're there to learn, and EMM, along with other refugee resettlement agencies, help accompany them in that process. And they are able to do that because of the volunteers and the donors who step into that process with them.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful reminder, Alan, because you brought me back to that place where, I'm showing up in a country I've never been to, barely heard anything about. I don't speak the language. I've never lived without electricity or running water, or, known how to wash my own clothes by hand. And that welcome that I received from church women, from leadership in the community, just to say, we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you're okay. We're going to make sure that you don't go hungry, even though you don't know how to grow your own food right now. We're going to teach you. And just being a warm, friendly, welcoming presence. It makes all the difference. It's life-changing. And I know I still think of especially those women in that little village in Basau who like helped me feel at home there. And I'll never forget them and always be thankful for them. And it's beautiful to know that we can be that for other people too.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity for us. Given that it is Advent, I've been thinking a lot, of course, about our Lord and Savior Jesus and his parents, Mary and Joseph, traveling to a far and foreign land without a place to call home, and no room at the inn. I'm wondering, like, you've been an Episcopalian all your life. What do you think we can learn from their story of refuge?
It's so the Episcopal Church has been involved in a form of refugee resettlement, or maybe more broadly, welcoming the immigrant for a long time, for decades. And one of the key moments of that was the early part of the 20th century. And there's a poster that EMM continues to use in their logo of this family that we're so familiar with.
We have one hanging in the hallway, actually, at Redeemer. Yeah.
Awesome. So take a moment.
It says, in the name of these refugees, aid all refugees, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So next time you're there, for those listening, take a look at that poster and think about that, because that image is so core, and then the concept of welcome is so core to our faith, and is one of the more explicit instructions, in my opinion, to us, and how to live out our faith in a practical way, how to follow Jesus. And I think that's, thinking now, what's the significance of this story? That to me is the application. It's really a direct call to be welcoming, and it points out the risks when we don't do that, when we're not welcoming, when we're not reaching out and caring for the stranger, whether that's someone from down the street or from around the world. And we may not know the right way to care for them. There may be mistakes and bumps along the way in that relationship building, in that process, but we're called to do that work. And I think again, that's a big part of following Jesus. So, thinking from a different perspective too, I know folks in the church some people don't want the church to be political. I think what they mean most of the time is they don't want us to be partisan, meaning supporting a political party, which we don't do. But in terms of being political, the core of that is making decisions as a group. We have church politics, we make decisions as a group, as a church all the time. That's political. It's the same thing in a participatory government that we have. And I see frequently folks make maybe too big of a leap or an assumption that from Scripture we can get the 2021 U.S. government legislation that we need in the House and the Senate. That's almost not possible to do. We can draw values, we can be informed by Scripture, and then try to apply that in present time. But I think that maybe I could be convinced, and I've heard others talk to this, that immigration and welcoming the stranger is potentially an exception to that. There is just very clear language, very clear storytelling, not just in the story of Jesus and the Holy Family, but in other stories as well throughout the Bible, of the importance of welcoming others, of the importance of hospitality, of curiosity and humility. And that I think has some direct implications in our government advocacy, and our willingness to step up and volunteer and accompany people in these situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, our scriptures remind us deeply to welcome all people, and to never neglect to show hospitality to a stranger, because some have entertained angels without knowing it by doing this.
One other thought, and this is something I don't necessarily speak to quite often, but we think of immigration, we think of migration as crossing an international border. And that's very much the case quite often. But when we're talking about welcome, it really is for anyone. And I think there more and more, unfortunately, there are parts of the United States where people have been internally displaced. There's a type of migration that's not, crossing international border, but I think of people who have been impacted by forest fires out west, or some of the really strong hurricanes that have been hitting the Gulf Coast and the eastern seaboard, or the flooding that happened in the Midwest. Those are examples too of migration and where there is a need to welcome a stranger. And I see the church stepping up in those ways, and I hope that people can also apply that thinking and that selflessness and approach to folks who are international immigrants as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great thought. That's not where my mind was, and it's good to be reminded, that there are friends and neighbors not so far away that also need that hospitality, that welcome, that I want for us to be able to say the Episcopal Church welcomes you and really truly mean it in everything that we say and do. And that definitely goes beyond, just foreign refugee status. So thank you for that reminder, Alan.
Yeah.
And I think, at this point in our conversation, I'm wondering, how do we do this? How do we actually plug in? How do we find the organizations that are helping make this real for us? How do we participate with the wider Episcopal Church in being welcome for people?
Yeah. So I mean, the two primary resources within the Episcopal Church, which may be where you land in terms of your engagement, but it may just be a jumping off point, referring you to another organization or another place where you feel called to help, would be Episcopal Migration Ministries and the work that they do across a number of immigration or immigrant communities, refugee resettlement again being one of those. There are a lot of ways to engage with them, even if there's not a refugee resettlement site like in your area. There's likely one led by another organization that they partner with. So there's a way to tap into that work quite easily. And I think of that work as tangible ministry is the word that I use. So then the second sort of intangible piece and second resource would be the Office of Government Relations and our Episcopal Public Policy Network. So signing up to get our action alerts that you mentioned would be a great way to stay informed about the immigration policy and legislation developments, how the church is speaking out on them, how you can speak out with us in that work. The action alerts that we send out cover all of the topics that we work on, but immigration again is a significant portion of those. So those would be the two resources to start with, and I think there's more than enough there. It's almost overwhelming, to be honest. But the strength of that comes from, I don't say that it is sort of bragging in a sense, but it really is more an acknowledgement. The strength of both our advocacy work and EMM comes from the people who take that next step and who get involved. So it's joining that effort that's quite important.
That's awesome. I will make sure to put links to EMM and the Office of Government Relations on the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer website, which you all know is redeemer-cincy with a y.org. And we'll have those links up accompanying this podcast. So if you're looking for more information or how to get involved in this subject area and be welcome to our neighbors and friends who need that very deeply now and always, you can check out those links on our website.
That sounds good.
Alan, is there anything that you want to leave us with? Any wisdom to share beyond all of this amazing information on refugee resettlement and being home and welcome to people as we as we part. I'm so honored to have you as a fellow missionary, like out there in the field. A big part of why I'm doing this work is to show people that being a missionary can look so many different ways, and that we are all missionaries in our work and in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our lives. You're a great testament to that. So I'm just really grateful for you.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation, and a part of the lesson, and I think maybe in the process of being a missionary, whatever that, what that means fairly broadly, we each have our own particular capacities that we bring into this work. And, there is a need for a very diverse array of resources, of skills, of people. And so I think, for folks that may be hesitant to get on board with this because they feel, they're not prepared or they don't have the right skill set, like there probably is a way that you can be helpful and be a resource for welcoming others. That means so many different things. There's so many beautiful dynamic aspects of welcoming, where you can apply yourself and be useful in this work and learn and grow in this work as well.
Absolutely. Oh, we're so grateful to have you, Alan, here with Redeemer and all those who listen to the podcast and consider themselves a part of this beautiful community. And we're just so grateful. Blessed Advent and a Merry Christmas to everyone. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.